All right. Welcome, everybody. We are at the info session for the Summer 2023 Digital Scholarship Certificate Program. And I think Rachel put a link to the slides in the chat. If you want to follow along, and we'll share them at the end as well. This will be recorded so you can watch again later. We are the UCR Library Digital Scholarship Team, and I'll let my teammates introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Rachel Starry. I am the Digital Scholarship Librarian here.
And I am Crystal Bollert. I'm the Digital Initiatives Specialist.
And hello, my name is Sandy Enriquez. I am the Special Collections, Public Services, Outreach, and Community Engagement Librarian.
Lastly, my name is Alvaro Alvarez. I'm the Innovative Media Librarian.
In today's outline, just so you know what to expect for our info session, we're going to cover what is Digital Scholarship Certificate Program, and we'll talk through all of the details and ins and outs of the program. So you'll learn all about it. And we'll also talk about the requirements for completing the program to get your certificate of completion. We will discuss the application process and the deadline, very important. And we will also be showing a secret treasure later, so please stay tuned for that. And at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A. If there's anything that we haven't answered or other questions you might have, you are welcome to ask at that time, again, either through chat or audio. So moving forward, what is the Digital Scholarship Certificate Program? It is a free, non-credit bearing undergraduate learning opportunity, and it's led by us, the team of UCR Library staff. We will have some other folks joining us as well, but we are the core team that's producing this program. So you'll see us around for that. The program is designed for you to engage deeply with primary sources and develop hands-on practical skills using digital research tools and methods.
Okay, so why student and Black, Indigenous people of color voices? With this program, it's an opportunity to engage deeply with the archival collections that highlight student activism and BIPOC student voices here at UCR. In turn, you are creating new research in your own voice. That's an important part of UCR's history. So it's a great opportunity, like I just mentioned, just to learn from past students and get to see some of the stuff that's been put in our archives, and you'll get to read it. You'll get to do workshops where you'll be doing like 3D scanning and a lot of cool stuff with that. Next slide, please. And who can apply? So the program is open to UCR undergraduate students. You do not have to be enrolled in summer courses, but however, you do need to have access to campus because a lot of the workshops will be held in person. So as long as you can get to campus, that would be great. Like if you're living nearby or on campus for either if you're enrolled or not. So there is a requirement, and I think that's on one of the other slides. You need to attend a certain number of the workshops to be able to be awarded the certificate. So next slide. So when does it begin? So there's a mandatory orientation session that will be held Thursday, June 29th for the 1-week program. A total of 6 90-minute workshops will be available, and the program ends August 4th. And it will be held here at the UCR campus in both the Rivera and Orbach libraries. So it'll kind of alternate depending on the workshops and the rooms that we have available at the time.
Yeah, so as Alvaro said, this is a 6-week program with a bunch of different workshops. So this is kind of the structure of the program. There's going to be morning workshops and then afternoon hands-on lab sessions in the different libraries where you'll get to kind of practice and actually engage with the physical archival materials, and then after we do some scanning of them or imaging of them, the digitized version. So what will participants in this program learn about? These are the 6 main workshop topics spread across the 6 weeks of the program. The first is where you're going to get a chance to actually learn how to conduct research with archives and special collections. Sandy's going to lead that, and it is going to be in our archives. So get hands-on, practice with these archival materials, which is really cool. The next up is do-it-yourself DIY imaging in the archives, where you'll learn how to take pictures when you're doing archival research. As Alvaro mentioned, we're also going to show you how to do some 3D scanning, which is really cool, of more complex kind of items that are not just flat documents in the archive. The third workshop is on what we call metadata and data management. And that's really a fancy way of saying you're going to learn how to describe and organize the different research materials you're going to create as you're kind of doing this archival research. The fourth workshop, the second half of the program kind of turns to more, once you've got these items digitized, what do you do with them? How do you do research on them? Learning more about digital research tools and skills. So the fourth workshop is optical character recognition. That's what OCR means. And it's really all about turning images of digitized documents, flyers, books, all sorts of different things from the special collections you're going to be exploring into actual, machine readable, searchable texts where you can actually highlight the text or copy and paste the text and it's, readable. So how to use software to do that. The fifth workshop is on quantitative text analysis. So we'll look at using one particular kind of software to explore lots of documents at once, right? More than one human being could ever read easily kind of and compare. So we'll talk about kind of moving back and forth between the documents themselves and using software to find bigger themes and using it to visualize patterns across lots of documents. And then finally, kind of wrapping up the entire program, we're going to talk about the decision-making process in selecting and presenting different archival materials. And you'll have a chance to kind of pick 2 to 4 items that you've had a chance to explore and kind of juxtapose them to tell a particular narrative, your story, or what the story that these different items in combination can tell. So we'll talk about curating digital exhibits. And yeah, that's the overview of the program. So next slide. So those are the workshops. What are the requirements then to kind of complete the certificate and be awarded the certificate at the end? So we're asking everyone to attend a minimum of 4 out of the 6 workshops. Each workshop will have 2 or 3 lab sessions, depending on your schedule. You might want to attend, one on different days. So a total of, 6 minimum lab sessions across all 6 weeks, and then kind of 2 just little assignments. One is what we're calling failure log. So a lot of times when you're learning new things, you'll hit kind of challenges, or sometimes you'll hit a wall and like the software is not doing what you want it to do, and that's okay. That is expected. That's a normal part of the process. So we're going to ask everyone to kind of take, kind of keep a journal across the 6 weeks of the program, and at the end to submit a very either a compilation of a bunch of different kind of reflections on things you've struggled with. Or kind of longer. You can kind of also just wait to the end and write a reflection essay, not too long. And then again, because the kind of wrapping up of the program is about you choosing archival items, we're going to ask you to just record a brief video or audio, whichever you're most comfortable with, kind of just talking about the exhibit that you would put together with those, 2 to 4 items. So finally, how do you apply, right? The application process is super streamlined. It's just a Google form. Applications are going to be due April 28th. We will be sending out notifications of acceptance. There is a limited number of seats in the program, so we can't take perhaps all students who apply. So definitely get your application form in before the deadline. We'll be notifying folks in May. And I'll copy this link into chat. Again, it's just a Google form that should only take maybe 10 to 15 minutes to fill out, asking about, what's your major, when are you expecting to graduate, and kind of why you want to take this program, what you're hoping to get out of it. There is no prior experience required. This is really for students at any level who just want to learn more about archival research and digital scholarship and digital research. So again, I'm going to copy this link into chat, and that is where you can find all the information to apply.
All right, so on to the good stuff, the exciting stuff. We want to take this time to show you all some examples of the types of materials that you would be working with during this program. Just out of curiosity, has anyone seen our Instagram Live yet? We did a little brief recording about giving a sneak peek into some of the items. So if folks have seen that already, I want to pick some stuff that's different. You can just give me a thumbs up if you've seen it. Oh yeah, thank you, Rachel, for popping it into the chat. So if you want to check it out afterward, we go a little in depth into some of those, but it looks good because I think no one's seen it yet. So cool. We got a great amount of material to look at, and bear with me because my office is really small and everything's just kind of crowded around. So it might take me a minute to find some stuff, but and I'm also tethered by this headphone. Let's bring a pile of stuff to take a look at, and feel free as I go through these to just pop any questions you have in the chat about the item or about anything to do with the program. And to my fellow colleague librarians, please feel free to pop in if you know that this item might be used in a workshop that you're going to be leading to let folks know what they might be doing with this type of material. So I'm going to share screen now. Here we go. Okay, cool. So put it like this. So our first item that we're looking at is this little booklet called Together. And this was actually a literary magazine created by the Black Student Union here at UCR. So this was published, I think around like the 1965 or so. And I'll just flip through it to give you an idea of what it looks like. But as you can see, it's all these awesome different creative works, creative writing, photography, poetry, all by students here at UCR at a time that, you know, in the 60s was the civil rights movement. So a lot of political activity on campus, a lot of activism going on, protesting. And this just kind of gives you a snapshot into a little bit of the student experience from that time. Okay. So yeah, that is Together. And then another example of student work here at UCR, you might recognize Scotty here. This is a little booklet that was donated to us just pretty recently, actually, within the last 5 years. It's titled Discrimination at UCR Is. And then you can see each page has a different scenario that the creator of this booklet, who is a student here at UCR, maybe witnessed on campus or had been told about by their friends. And this book is actually based on another book, which is called Rape Is. And then it had a similar theme of showing different scenarios that the author had witnessed or been told about. And so the student made this booklet as a response to that book. And this is what we would call an artist book. So, you know, it is a book that you read through, but there's also elements of artistry to it. It's usually handmade. So as you can tell, this binding here is like a little thread. And the way that the booklets flap open like this is also intentional creative decision of the author. So these are really cool. They're usually labor intensive to make, so you don't get to make too many of them. I think in this case, this run was probably like less than 10 of them made in total. But these are really great, and we have a lot of examples of these here in special collections. And next, I'll show you an example of an artist book that's perhaps a little more non-traditional and unexpected. Okay, so this it's going to be a little hard to look at here from the document camera because this is as far as I can zoom out. But as you can tell, I mean, this is very different, right? We might not think to call this a book. We have this beautiful flower rope, I guess, or like little twine around it. And this item kind of encourages us to unwrap it. In order to be able to read here, we need to unfurl some of this tool. And we have an idea that, you know, this is copy 2 of 15. So only 15 of these were made total. This is another example of a student work. And it's a great example of kind of the artistry of artist books and the creativity that goes into them. So in order to be able to read the story and know what the author is, you know, sharing with us, we have to kind of play with the item. We might not automatically know how are we supposed to interact with it? How do we even start to read the story? And in this case, I'm kind of like rotating it as I see that the font, how the orientation of it is written. So now you can see it unfurls and we have so many layers to go through. So each of these tells a story of a different couple, and then kind of the changes amongst these couples, and you can read through it yourself, but you see these beautiful hand-drawn elements, the different textiles that are used. All of that is an intentional decision to sort of immerse you in the story. So that's what's really fun about artist books. There's these elements of play in them. And again, this is just another creation by a student here at UCR. We actually used to have a book arts program. And so through that program, a lot of students were able to express their creativity through creating objects like this. And this one's especially fun because you might not know this on first glance, but if you explore it enough, you'll see that the finale of the story is actually inside. So you kind of need to pull that out and then reorient yourself to see how does the story end. So that's a really fun one. And this is something that you would use for like the 3D scanning workshop to think through how do we even start to photograph or, you know, kind of document this digitally. And in our first workshop, which is going to be Encountering Archives, we're really going to talk a lot about that too, in what is lost when we digitize items. Because of course, there's so many elements to it, like this roughness of the wood. Let me see if you can't really tell too much, but it's very unfinished wood. So all those kind of elements, those touches, how do we continue to acknowledge and record them, even when we move into the digital sphere? So are there any questions in the comments or anything that my colleagues want to like pop in, or should I just keep going?
I'm not seeing any questions, but does anyone have questions? Like, feel free to start popping them in chat. We, answered one about how many workshops are needed to get the certificate. We'd love to hear what other questions you have. We have plenty of other items we could show you. If there's, particular things you're interested in learning, feel free to kind of share that too in chat. Otherwise, we can go with a couple more documents.
Yeah.
Oh, do you have to make a book? You don't have to. But we actually have a couple of interesting activities planned where you can learn about different things, not necessarily bookmaking, but Sandy, what was that activity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're not requiring you to learn how to make a book, but part of that first workshop on Encountering Archives, we really want to talk about materiality and the physicality of items. So we will have some hands-on activities. We're talking about potentially doing one where you can do a binding for a book. So we would supply all the materials for you. We would teach you how to do that. And it's more just for you to get an idea of all the labor that goes into the creation of these objects. I think a lot of times it's easy for us, since we're so distanced and removed from that act, to kind of not appreciate how much time and energy and skill goes into creating those kinds of things. So we'll kind of explore some small exercises like that. And we'll also do hopefully a printing workshop. And I'll show you that after I finish this newspaper that I pulled up here. But we will be doing some really beginner-friendly, totally no prior experience necessary activities to emulate some of the printing methods that students used here at UCR back in the 60s and 70s, at a time when the Xerox machine was not yet common, easily accessible, and social media had not yet been invented. So we had to do a lot of analog, manual types of materials. Okay, so I'll just introduce this item here real quick. This is Nuestra Cosa. This was a student-made newspaper. This is specifically by Mecha, which was an organization of Chicano students here at UCR. As you can tell, this one is from December 1973, but we have many issues from this newspaper that were recently digitized, but we can look at all of the original printed ones here in the archive. And so the great thing about this newspaper was it really focused on the experiences, the joys and the struggles of the Chicano community here at UCR. So there's a lot of like news reporting about injustices that were happening to the community. There's comics, cartoons, there's poetry, there's art. There's some great photographs just kind of documenting different events that were occurring here on campus, as you can see here. And there was a lot of like discussion with other Chicano groups on other campuses as well. So you can learn a lot from newspapers about the social climate of at the time and what sorts of activities students were engaged in. So we'll look through those. Oh, we can also see some of the political activities that went on, such as boycotting grocery stores. This was during the time of the grape strikes. So the Farm Workers Union and MECHA was one of those groups that was really on the forefront of supporting the farm workers here in Riverside and making sure that their voices were heard. Okay, so I was mentioning earlier printing methods. I think we will find one in here, but this is just an example of some of the what we call ephemera. So things that were meant to be ephemeral. So like flyers, brochures, little pamphlets, the kind of things that you see posted up around campus. Those are really great for giving us a snapshot into the social and political climate of the time. And we have many examples of these in the archives about the types of activities that were going on back in the 70s and 60s. And so this is just a snapshot, a very small, little brief example of some of the flyers that you would see posted around campus, or in this case, like letters that organizations were sending out to one another about events that were going on, and also classes. So if you're interested in academic history, thinking about how programs like ethnic studies, at the roots used to be Chicano studies, sometimes Mexican American studies, and seeing what types of classes people were wanting to have, this is really helpful for that. Here at UCR, and in the case in many universities, all those classes really came about because of the activism of students and faculty of color. So it was through their protests and through their voices that we were able to advocate for those programs to be created and those resources to be allotted to students. This is just another example of like a flyer. Here, let's see if I can find one with a particular printing method. Oh yeah, so this one, you might notice that there's some, this looks a little different. It's not as bold. It's a little bit more of a, let's see if I can kind of go a little closer to give you an idea. Yeah, there we go. So it's a little bit more like shaded and uneven in its shading. And that's because the printing methods that were used to make this had to be like duplicative. And so it would be a lot of etching. So you'd have to if you had like a wax cover on top, you would kind of etch out what you wanted to do and create a stencil. And so that's why you see more imperfections than you do in like this. This is like pen being written in, which made sense, right? It would make sense to make a template flyer if this was your main way of getting information out about your meetings. You would create a template and then you would just input the time of the meeting, the location, and then post that around the campus. So we'll kind of play around with some different printing methods to emulate these styles and get an idea of what it was like to kind of rely on these technologies. And you'll have many great examples from the archives of the creativity that people had and the artistry that they had, even with these really limited kind of analog means. Oh yeah, and this is another thing you'll see a lot. The fading is just because of the stencil style. So it was very light soluble, definitely water soluble. So, these are ephemeral documents that are oftentimes probably not going to last much longer, which is great in digitization that we can be able to preserve them for the long term. And then also things like this, a little hard to see here in the light, but it is tape. And there's actually a lot of it all over this flyer. And so those are traces of how these flyers were used. These were, posted up on walls around campus. And all of those clues kind of give us insight to what this document can mean for the history of students here at UCR. All right.
There is a question in chat, Danny, that kind of relates to some of these items you're showing us. So will the program allow us to handle archival materials that need special care, like very distressed or fragile documents, artworks, fabrics, etc.?
Yes, we will definitely be handling materials that need special care. A lot of them are in pretty good condition, but there are some that are definitely crumbling. some of the newspapers, for example. So I would let you know if there's anything that you wouldn't be able to pick up and move around and rotate. But most of the items that we'll be looking at, you'll at least be able to handle in that way. And I'll teach you all of the guidelines that you need to know to be able to do that safely and intentionally, carefully. And it's great because those are pretty similar standard guidelines across special collections and archives. So once you have an idea of what it's like to work with materials here, it will empower you to work with materials at other institutions as well. And how are we doing on time?
We've got plenty of time if anyone has other questions.
Yeah, because I think I went through most of my main materials. I do have a few more I can show if we do want to.
No, I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any archives regarded to Leonardo da Vinci?
You know, I do not think so. We do have a lot of archives on artists. A lot of them tend to be local artists for the area. So we can talk a little bit about that too, kind of like the specialties that we focus on here at UCR Special Collections. But Da Vinci is unfortunately not one of them. But we do have examples of artists from UCR as well as Southern California as a whole. All right, so maybe I'll do like one or two more, and then we'll see if any more questions kind of pop up along the way. Okay. Knocking into my camera here. So this is an example. Let me see if I can zoom out a little bit more. There we go. Of another artist book we have. And so you can tell that the binding on this one is really beautiful. It's kind of like this netting kind of way. And so those are, again, more details that we'll look at when we inspect these items. And I know that, unfortunately, you can't touch this one in person, but the paper is handmade. So it's this really beautiful, soft, very, kind of organic kind of edging on it. It's almost got like a shine to it as well, which might not show up too well on camera. But this is another example of an artist book. Let me go here. So you can tell down here. This was the class that the student made this book in from spring 2012. And I believe it's like a series of poems. So again, we have that sort of like overlay piece like that. I called it tulle in the other one because it was a little bit more rough and scratchy. This one's very soft. So it's probably a different type of material, but you can tell that it has that kind of organic drawing on it and then more handmade paper. The printing style on this too was hand done by the students. So more kind of details to get about how this material was made and how the artist intended for it to be interacted with. All right. And this is a rare example actually of an item where we actually have two of them. Very rarely do we have more than one of anything. So it's kind of fun to have two, so then two students could probably look at them at the same time and do their analysis together. Okay, I'll show you just one last page of this one. Oh yeah, it's really pretty. And then I think I can do, oh yeah, here we go. Something that I forgot to mention when I showed you the other flyers and ephemera is that when we are doing the workshops, we'll also talk a little bit about the difference between handwriting and type. So for example, here you can see that this type of text and font would be able to be machine readable most likely, but there's many examples where we have pages that have a combination of the text with handwriting. Hopefully this is one of them. If not, I might have to grab another one. Oh yeah, maybe this isn't the greatest example, but so there's some elements as well that won't be able to be read when you are creating your OCR, you're working with these documents to be able to make them text legible. But this sort of thing might be lost in that. So just thinking through those elements of what is gained when we digitize materials, and then what is also lost, and how do we sort of account for that, and continue to remember those elements as well. And this is a pretty cool one because this is actually a collaboration. This was an event that was put together by the Latin American Student Committee, as well as the Associated Student Body of UCR, ASUCR.
Yeah, so one of the things that the program will really emphasize, and we'll have lots of discussions about, is essentially the human decision-making process. Like, you're going to be in the position of a researcher, a scholar who is looking at these materials and trying to figure out, what are the decisions that need to be made to photograph them, to make the content of them, and share them with the world. Again, as Sandy's saying, like, what is lost? We know all the tactile material things, like, can you represent those in different ways? Or, how would you create a digital exhibit that kind of emphasizes the materiality of these 3D artists' books, for examples? The software that we use to do things like OCR and text analysis, it's not magic. A human made the software, and you as the user, as the scholar, have to also make decisions about how you're going to analyze and then present these materials. So that's what this whole thing is all about. And we have a question in chat. The question is the orientation session, which is mandatory in person. I believe so the entire program is hybrid. So some of the workshops will be in person. Obviously, the one that's about learning how to use the archival materials, you have to be there to see the archival materials. We actually are going to offer that on 2 different dates in case you're not available one of the dates. The other workshops, some of them will be in person, some of them might be virtual. So you could attend them, on Zoom or in the library. A lot of the lab sessions in the afternoons are going to only be in person because you have to kind of come in again and like work with the software on the computers that we have here. So there is some flexibility. If you're not available, like, 1 week, or you have to travel, in this example, we can definitely work with participants. If you're not able to make certain sessions, that's okay. Don't feel like you can't apply for the program if you don't know that you can't attend like a couple of the sessions. That's totally fine. And there's another question about how long are the workshops. So they're, I think, all planned to be 90 minutes-ish. So they're usually, we've got kind of a 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. time slot in the mornings on different dates. And if you want to see the specific dates that we've scheduled out, the full schedule in draft form, again, we're going to kind of respond to the group's availability. If we learn that, most folks aren't available on a certain day, then we will try and shift things to accommodate the actual, participants that we have and your schedules. But if you want to see the full kind of plan schedule, that's available in the info packet, which is, I can pop a link in chat to the info packet, or in fact, the page on the library's website where you can find all of this information.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, but I know when you do the lab sessions in the afternoon, you all will have sort of like an exercise, right? Like a somewhere for students to start. So a structure, or if students have like specific questions or specific projects that they might want to try to do, like we can also respond to that and maybe see how we can help.
Yeah, if you're really interested in working on, again, as Sandy mentioned, we have all these different kinds of archives to choose from. So if you're really interested in those 3D artist books, you can kind of work with those throughout the course of the program. If you're more interested in the student newspapers and the different perspectives that they represent, you could work with those. So it's really, a lot of it is up to what you're interested in learning about and working with.
I also see there is a question about how did the items come to be included in the school's archives, and are they specifically recommended by the profs, or do students insist on having their works preserved? Great question. So we have 2 main archives that kind of document the student experience here at UCR. And one of them, we believe, was actually created by a librarian here at UC Riverside, like way back in the day. And so this librarian went around campus and sort of, took down flyers that she was seeing, just documenting events that she felt were important. And we think it's a librarian because we also see some documents in that archive about like the books that the library was purchasing, and sort of like the way that students of color were sort of coming into universities and sort of the programs that were being created to support them. So it did seem that it was someone in the community who just wanted to document history that they were experiencing in their day-to-day lives. And then in the other archive that we have on student activism, that for sure we know was a graduate student. So it was a PhD student in history who was studying the Civil War for his dissertation. And he was really, disappointed that so many documents from that era had not been preserved. And so he kind of wanted to preserve history as he was seeing it in the 60s and 70s. As a history student, he had this really a passion for kind of helping create documents for scholars of the future. So it's really great that we had folks, just regular folks from campus who wanted to document their time and bring in that material to special collections. As far as the student works from like the artist books and the classes, I'm not sure how they were actually brought here. My assumption is that the professors probably asked them, is it okay if we preserve your works? And they may have agreed to do that. There's a lot of legislation and law around how student work, can be shared or presented and in the public, and it's often protected. So we would have definitely had, students giving permission to have that work brought here. And then I do want to mention your last question about, do students insist on having their works preserved? With the case of the artist book Discrimination at UCR Is, so this one right here, this one was actually donated by a student directly. So they really wanted to have this be included. Like I remember the student coming up to us and saying I want to make sure that that's in the archive. So that does happen as well. It's materials get here many different ways, and we can kind of talk about that in the workshop as well, because that does impact how you use those materials in research. It's all interconnected. And what's the oldest archive at UCR? Ooh, I should know the answer to that. Yeah, I'm not sure. There's definitely some pretty old material. We have some books from oh my gosh, I don't know, the 1600s, around there. I think probably one of those would be the earliest. We do have actually a collection on early writing, but none of those are originals. They're, models of cuneiform, early Chinese writing, but they're the instruments. And that was actually used in the book arts program to sort of teach students a little bit about early writing tools and methodologies and see how that evolved over time into different printing methods. So that kind of gives you an insight into sort of those older technologies, but not original, more teaching use. Yeah, you're welcome.
What other questions do you all have?
What was your favorite archive that you worked on?
I have many. It's hard to pick just one. I love the student activism archives. I've used them a lot in a lot of classes and tours as well. So, I mentioned Mecha was one of the groups that's really prominent in these archives. So I worked with the current Mecha we have on campus to have them come in and take a look at those materials and think about how their group has evolved and the sorts of things that they were doing, back in the day. What do they still do today? What do they want to revisit or reconnect with or bring back after seeing that? So I think it's kind of the reason we chose Student Voices for this program is we feel like that's most relevant to you all as students of UCR, right? Sometimes it's hard to connect with archival material because it's just so removed from your reality. It could be stuff from hundreds of years ago from a country that you've never been to, and it's not always easy to kind of connect to that and be able to work closely with that if it's not relevant to you. But certainly histories of students at UCR, their experiences, I think all of us can kind of connect to that on some element. So yeah, to me, any things that personally come from the area I grew up in or just the communities that I'm from, it's really, really meaningful.
I'll shout out to Nuestra Cosa, which I thought was very cool. I worked on digitizing those, so I got to see them firsthand. And it's a student newspaper, right? Just like the Highlander, but it's a totally different student experience. And the stories that are in there and the narratives and the experiences that the students who are writing Nuestra Cosa have are very different than what we see in the Highlander. And just the way that their lives interacted with current events, there's different reactions, different kinds of, you know, the different layers of meaning to those students who are writing Nuestra Cosa show up. And there's different artifacts like party flyers and drawings and cartoons and just, you know, different activities that are listed in the newspaper. It's just, you know, I think there's some CD reviews, that sort of thing. So that's pretty fun to see. It's a, you know, all of those experiences are part of UCR's history. So it's nice to see those documented.
And I know we're talking a lot about kind of books or documents and flyers and all these sorts of different things, but the archives have also a ton of images. So we've got a bunch of collections that have a lot of photographs. I don't know, Sandy, how much we have on like audio or video. I know we have some, but for instance, like, you know, there's past researchers at UCR who have done oral history projects. So they've interviewed residents of Riverside or, yeah, so we have different kinds of materials. If you're, you know, not super excited about newspapers, you know, some people get really nerdy about newspapers, not everyone does. So there's all kinds of materials. So if you're more interested in like the images, we can also look at those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds amazing.
Thank you. We're glad to see that there's been interest in the program. You know, this is a pilot program. This is the first time we're doing anything like this. So all of this is really brand new for us, for the community here. But we hope that if it is successful, that, you know, it's something maybe we can expand in the future. We know that when we were kind of piloting it and proposing it to some different stakeholder groups, the graduate students were asking, why can't graduate students be a part of it too? Or like, why can't you include them? But we really wanted to make it focused for undergrads, right? And to really be able to kind of put all of our attention into and making it really relevant and useful for that group. And then, yeah, in the future, maybe we can expand, but we're really excited about it. There's a question. Has there been any archival materials that are unpleasant to handle in your personal experience or that you've heard of? Like, for example, materials that have gone in moldy. Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Luckily for me, I get to work with materials once they're usually like ready to be served to the public. The archivists, who we have two here, they're the ones that really work with materials as soon as it gets in. And there have been cases that it's come in with insects and, you know, usually dead. There was one case where there was many live grasshoppers and crickets for some weird reason. And we actually had to put them in a special room. And so our student staff were helping us bring these boxes up, but there was just little crickets jumping around and it was a mess. But we were able to quarantine those items and make sure that they were cleaned before we brought them in, because of course we don't want to bring any active infestations, right, to the rest of our materials. That would be horrible. And there have been materials, actually we will use this collection. We have a collection, the Kim Family Papers, which is on the experiences of a Korean American family in Riverside. And it's a beautiful collection because they have photos from ancestors that were like Victorian era, you know, like all the type of like dress and formal wear, all the way up to like the 60s and 70s, actually the 90s as well. So you really see a spectrum of a family from just many generations. And one of the yearbooks that the daughters did have some like kind of sticky residue, kind of like just old age. So not the funnest to thumb through, but the content is so interesting and so fascinating that you look past those details, right? And we do have gloves if you want to wear gloves, though we don't recommend using gloves actually to handle most material, because contrary to popular belief, gloves can actually make it harder or to handle materials, more likely to slip. So we really only use gloves when we handle photographs that are bare, that aren't sleeved in plastic already or protected. But we'll talk all about that as well. The Eye of Thoth. I'm not sure. I could check though. You would use our UCR library catalog that has a record of everything we have, both in special collections and the archives, as well as the rest of the libraries. So, we can take a look at that and see if we do have it. Sometimes it's a little tricky to navigate, but that's the best tool to find out what we do have here.
Yeah, and I want to call out Lorena asked a really fantastic question about, is the idea the certificate can count towards your CV as experience managing digital data? So, we'll probably talk about the word data a lot throughout the program. Like, what does it mean when we're talking about archival materials? Are they data? Are images data? What different kinds of text are data? I mean, the answer is, yes, and also no in different ways. So it won't be just limited to the idea of, kind of quantitative data. Again, we're looking at all different kinds of materials, a lot of which is very qualitative and really more about either the materiality of the objects or the experiences that, are represented in these different materials. But that is absolutely the goal of this program, that you're going to have a kind of concrete thing you walk away with, evidence. You can put it on your CV, you can put it on your resume, you can talk about it if you're applying for grad school, or if you're looking for a job. You can kind of use this as evidence of the different skills that you're learning about archival and digital research.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think we might have mentioned it too already, but there will be like a closing ceremony, or like a little party at the end of this as well. And we'll have food, we'll give out certificates, and it'll be great. It'll be a nice celebration and kind of a reflection and recap. So we really do want to hear from you all. Like, if you do end up doing the program, what was your experience like? We really want to be able to incorporate your feedback if we do this again, so we can learn from it, because we're learning throughout this whole process as well.
I think we have one last slide we wanted to share, so I'm going to put that up and get this going. Slideshow. Not that one. We did some questions. You're welcome to still ask questions. We will be here for a few more minutes, but I wanted to say, where can I get more info? Wanted to share, we have a link on the slides again to the info packet. And then if you have any additional questions after our Q&A, you can reach out and contact us.
Thank you, Crystal. I forgot about that last slide.
I didn't want to forget it.
Yes, it's important. There's a lot of information in that packet, but it covers everything. So I bet you most of your questions could probably be answered through that, but we're also here for you.
Where is this packet?
I think a link was put in chat. Is that right, Rachel?
Yeah, I'll grab the link
in.
again. Yep, I'll pop the link again in chat. But really, we want to emphasize that, we're here to answer questions, not just today, but, if you have questions that come up, feel free to email us. My info is on the slide here.
And there's also another question in chat, Rachel, about what criteria will be used when deciding who is accepted to the program.
That's a really, really fantastic question. I'm glad you asked. We are taking into consideration a couple of things, and these are not hard and fast rules, but essentially, the reason we're asking you to share your previous experience, for instance, and when you're going to graduate, we are going to take into consideration if a student is getting ready to graduate, say your graduation date is approaching quickly, that means you probably won't have another opportunity in the future to take this program at UCR, at least, if you're not going to be an undergrad here for very much longer. So those students will probably be prioritized over, say, first years who are just getting their career started, and you may have multiple future years to take this advantage of this kind of opportunity. And along the similar lines, if someone has had previous experience with these exact, sorts of research skills and courses, we're going to want to include students in this program who have had no previous experience, and you're just, this is your first chance to really get started with this. We want to provide this as an opportunity to students who haven't had those opportunities before. So those are roughly the kinds of things we're going to be taking into consideration as we're looking through the applications. So I might go ahead and stop the recording now. So we've covered a lot of information and answered a lot of questions, but we can stick around for a few more minutes if anyone has lingering questions that, you want to ask.